Right. Apologies, Irate, for cutting that short. I'll just take a quick phone call. So, Act 5, Scene 1, Lady Macbeth cannot live with her guilt. And if you remember at the beginning of the play, in Act 1, Scene 5, it's very, very clear that Macbeth is in love with his wife, my dearest partner of greatness. It's very, very clear that he can be manipulated by her. It's very, very clear that for whatever reasons, their relationships, they feel as though that they should be doing something for each other. And as the play progresses, they drift further and further apart. Act 5, Scene 1, she cannot live with her guilt, her conscience is taking the better of her, and she's gone mad. She's washing her hands feverishly, she imagines seeing the blood on her hands, she's reverted to childhood again. And at the end of that scene, she rushes away. Okay? We get to Act 5, Scene 5. And this is a modern adaptation of it, but there is this speech which comes along. And Macbeth hears a scream, just as the battle's about to take place. And he says, "Wherefore was that cry?" What was that cry? And one of his soldiers says, "The Queen, my lord, is dead." Now, at the beginning of the play, Macbeth would have done anything for his wife. At the end of it, so resigned is he to fate that his response is, which I think is one of the greatest speeches, not just in this play, but in Shakespeare and therefore in English. "She should have died hereafter. There would have been time for such a word. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." So at the end of the play, I'll put on a real actor to say that for you. But at the end of the play, and particularly on the death of his wife, Lady Macbeth, Macbeth is resigned to fate. And the thing that keeps on coming up in that little speech that he makes is reference to time. And he realises now that his life is almost at an end. And all the time that we thought we had is very, very relative. And then he talks about the purpose of life. What should we do in life that makes us happy? Well, for him it was about fulfilling that ambition. He realises that he couldn't do that. It didn't give him what he thought it would. So he concludes, actually, life is like a play. And it's full of sound and fury. Lots of things happen, there's dramas. But at the end of the day, it signifies nothing. We've just got to be happy while we're doing it. And make other people happy. And that's the conclusion he comes to. That's the didactic purpose of the play as well. Just have a watch of this man, a man called Patrick Stewart.
The Queen, my lord, is dead. She should have died hereafter. There would have been a time for such a word.
Okay. So, what do we do next? Well, we do next exactly what we did with Richard III. I suggest you do a table like this. So you can just put a line down the middle of the page. And this is obviously in addition to the worksheets that Miss Mustafa and Miss Panu have been producing on this. But just like you did with Richard III, make a list of the reasons why that you think Lady Macbeth is a villain. The way she manipulates her husband, the way she calls on the forces of darkness, the way she could be a witch, the fact that she is willing to be violent, the fact that she is disloyal, the fact that she sees it as her purpose to pour those poisons in her husband's ear and persuade him and persuade him and persuade him to do what she feels though he should. But are there any positives? She is a very loyal wife. Does she just want the best for her husband? Is it because of guilt and not being able to give him a child that she does what she does? Is there anything to be said for her determination, the way that we could say that for Richard III? Is she under, ultimately, the power of the witches herself? From Act 1, Scene 1, when the witches conjure that spell. Macbeth is under their influence, and Lady Macbeth is under her influence as well. Is that in any way, shape or form an excuse? And ultimately the thing that should go in this column as well is the fact that we see in her foil scene in Act 5, Scene 1, that she has this conscience. Conscience which ultimately leads to her being driven mad and taking her own life, probably by jumping off the battlements of the castle. The same battlements that she had made that speech from when she called on the forces of darkness. So, it's a complex one, but having done that, you can start making comparisons now. You can start thinking to yourself, well, who is worse? Who is the greater villain? Okay. We're going to do one more villain, as I said. That's going to be Iago from Tragedy of Othello. What we've got in Richard III is a king who is deformed, and therefore, whether it's because the Tudors had to justify the legitimacy of their own claim to the throne, had to be made evil. So it was much more linked to the devil than God. What we have in Lady Macbeth is someone who's no doubt misguided, but is heavily under the influence of evil spirits. What we have in Iago is just a bad guy who seems to simply enjoy being bad, being a villain. Okay? Now, I'm not influencing your decision there at all, but I'll move on to him next.